Hello, welcome to Cory is Wrong About the Prequels, Clone Wars Season 7, the Martez Sisters arc. Some people also say the Ahsoka Spice Running arc, whatever we want to call it. This will be the second set of 4 episodes, episodes 5, 6, 7, and 8 of Season 7 of Clone Wars, the penultimate arc of this entire show before our spectacular finale. Today, as always, we will be discussing these 4 episodes in the context of the entire show. So we have obviously seen all of Season 7 of Clone Wars, as well as in the context of the entirety of Star Wars canon. That means potential spoilers for Star Wars Rebels, all of the original trilogy and the prequels and the Disney movies, although I suppose if you're watching this, I'm sure you've seen them. And also potential spoilers for the Ahsoka novel. One participant here has not read that, so unfortunately I may end up saying some spoilers for that to him. So if you have not read that and would like to read it and have no spoilers, then go out and read the Ahsoka novel, because it's quite good. However, if you're okay with that, you can listen to this and hear our thoughts. So why don't, Cory, you kick things off with your initial thoughts on these 4 episodes.
If this was not, and I'm sure you've heard this a lot, but if this was not the last season with a finite amount of episodes, it would be a standard arc. It would be like a 5 out of 10 arc in Clone Wars. Well, actually, no, higher than 5 because they had very strong moments within this. That being said, I think it should have still been in the finale, but I'm sorry, I just don't see it being 4 episodes. I think it being 4 episodes hurt it a lot. It made it slowly paced, repetitive. It really they could have gotten the message across of what they were trying to do in these 4 episodes within 2 episodes. I know what you're going to say back to me in return. You're going to say to me that anything that is not just Revenge of the Sith just being told in animation is something I'm not going to like, but that's not true because I really enjoyed the Bad Batch arc.
By the way.
But that being said, I really did not get into this arc. It was the slowest arc for me. Dread is I'm really harshly speaking right now, but I was very upset knowing that there were only 12 episodes in the last season and that 4 of these episodes were based on this.
Okay.
I think the most important, before I finish, I'm almost done. The most important things in this arc were Ahsoka learning that the Jedi are not held in high regard by everyone and that the Jedi maybe are not heroes, and that I think also it was just Ahsoka doing like a down-to-earth way of like trying to like, I guess hide her Jedi past and like all that type of stuff. It was average, it was okay, and in any other season with more Clone Wars ahead, it would have been completely serviceable and maybe even slightly above average. But in this context, I did not enjoy myself.
Okay. Before I give my initial thoughts, I want to ask you some questions, and this will kind of help me tease out my initial thoughts. Do you think that there was something missing from the final 4 episodes?
The final 4?
Yeah.
No, I thought they were perfect.
So, let's say, just for argument's sake, you're saying this didn't need to be 4 episodes. The problem is it's the last season and all that. Let's take off the table adding more to the final 4 episodes. Because as you said, you think those are really good. You don't think anything was missing. So are you saying that you think this would be better if Clone Wars Season 7 was 10 episodes with just this being condensed to 2?
So you're saying to me if this was... Yeah, but the answer... Yes, I see what your question is. And the answer is yes. The answer is yes.
Okay. If you're going to say that, that's fair. And I don't think you're entirely wrong. That being said, I think this arc is completely and totally unfairly maligned. And for a bunch of reasons. Number one of the reasons I wanted to do this the way we are doing it, the way we always do Thoughts from Aunt Wu content, is waiting until the entire season is over. Because if we did this right at the end of this arc, or even did this episode by episode, I would be in complete lockstep with you, saying, you know what, this is a little slow, this is average, it's not great, it's not terrible, did this really need to be here in the final season? When are we going to get to the stuff? We all know that the Siege of Mandalore is coming, this is what we want, let's just get there. That being said, we did get there, and the final 4 episodes are, not to spoil our content for next week, but incredible. And I have there's nothing about them I would change. I wouldn't want more of it. It was exactly what it should have been. So I don't think they should have cut this for something else really holds any water, because what were you going to cut this for? I mean, there's really not that much time in the Star Wars canon. I mean, I guess there are like other things you kind of could have done, but for the most part, I think that if you're arguing that this arc is too long, fundamentally what you're saying is you think this arc should have been 2 episodes and the entirety of the series should have been shorter. Because arguing, unless you're going to come up with this is the thing we didn't get to see that we should have seen, and I just don't think that's true. I don't think there's anything that I'm going, God, I really wish I got this from this particular time period within this episodes that we would have gotten. And then it becomes, all right, would this have been better as 2 episodes? It might have been, but I don't know about that. I think that there is some stuff that they're trying to do, and they do have interesting things. And I think that the slow pace for it is actually really important, because part of the point of all this is allowing the viewer to get into Ahsoka's mind space, into her headspace. And I am a huge fan of when a show is willing to use the aesthetics and pacing of an episode as part of the character development. And part of the reason that I think that this episode is so slow and it drags and it feels like, God, just can't we get done with this, is because that's the point. Ahsoka is not using lightsabers. She is trying to use the Force incredibly, not using it very much. She is frustrated with these people that she's with, and she's trying to find a new way in her world. And if this arc was just sort of very quick and was all right, like that first episode I guess was exactly the same, and you just condensed the next 3 episodes of this whole spice running thing into a single episode, and then okay, by the end she's met Bo-Katan and now we're back to everything else, it would have felt like, oh wow, her leaving the Jedi and all of that internal strife that she's going through was meaningless. But getting like a genuine sense of 4 episodes that are a bit of a drag, for me, really puts me in the mind space of, yeah, this is a drag. Because for Ahsoka right now, things are a lot tougher, and you're having to learn stuff about her. And I personally really like that stuff. I am fully aware that that is not something a lot of people are in love with. And I am totally aware that in some ways, the way I feel about these 4 episodes is actually kind of similar to how I feel about The Legend of Korra. Not to turn this into a full-on Thoughts from Home Korra discussion, but I think that one of the reasons I love Korra as much as I do, and one of the reasons that we started this entire podcast in the first place, was to answer the question, can a show be, I want to say bad. Bad is not the right word, but I'm just going to say bad on purpose in order to service the entire story. And I think that the beginning of The Legend of Korra is tough to watch, especially the first time through, because Korra is unlikable. There's a lot of issues with her character. But once you've seen the entire show, you realize that's kind of like the point. And even though like the point is a difficult thing to say within Korra, and again, I'll keep the Korra stuff to a brief, I think that part of it services her character for the story to come unfold like that. And I think it services Ahsoka's character for these episodes to be slow and monotonous in order to set us up for how big a change it is to, oh no, now she's back with the Grand Army of the Republic and we're moving at a breakneck pace. All right.
But I remember...
Over. So, Cory, what do you think?
I remember when I was first watching this, I was in the middle of the arc and I was messaging you during it, and you said to me that, did you read the Ahsoka book? And I'm like, I did not. And you said this is very similar to what the Ahsoka book was like. My issue is Clone Wars has so much left up in the air that I wanted to see finality to. So like there are like all these Clone Wars specific characters, like what's his fucking name? The pirate.
Hondo.
There's Hondo. There's the bounty hunter. What was the bounty number? The bounty hunter, Clone Wars.
The bounty hunter is Cad something. Cad Bane.
Yeah, Cad Bane. Like all these these Clone Wars specific characters and like lovable things. That's why I didn't mind the Clone War arc, the Bad Batch arc, because it told the story of the clones, which was a Clone War specific things. What you do here is you introduce these two brand new characters that, you know, were just introduced for whatever sake, and I think the story of what they were trying to tell with these two sisters could have been completed in a short amount of time. You could have kept them within a 4 episode structure, but also use it as a means to close out other arcs. And I think that is where they kind of dropped the ball. If I'm being serious, it felt like outside of like Ahsoka discovering that the Jedi are not held in high regards, and maybe having a few episodes away from like the Jedi Order and all that stuff, it felt like filler to me.
I mean, I don't entirely disagree with you, but again, I think that that's the point. I think that, like, in order for this to not be filler, you have to like add more sort of quote unquote important plot to it. Fundamentally, what you're saying is like I think part of the point is Ahsoka is not doing something that's all that important here. If Ahsoka was doing something important, I think that would take away from what the point of this. And I kind of see what you're saying about other characters, but honestly, as much as, yes, Clone Wars is a big sprawling thing and introduces a lot of characters, at its core, Clone Wars, and Dave Filoni has been very clear about this, is the story of Ahsoka and the story of the clones. And this season was always going to be a Rex-centered story, an Ahsoka-centered story, and then Ahsoka and Rex together. There's no way we were going to get a random Hondo Cad Bane like, what would that have been? Like, you're talking about filler. That would have been real filler. Like, who cares about this? And I love those characters. I'm not like, I wouldn't necessarily completely complain, but fundamentally, like, there's not, like, if you're saying, all right, well, you know, we could have gotten something with our other characters, like, I'm just not seeing it. Like, okay, we have an episode where a bunch of Jedi are doing more stuff with Hondo and they interact with Cad Bane again. Like, that's like pure filler to me.
Sure, but then there's like Ventress, and now Ventress, like, you know, after Dooku is something that I would like to see where she ended up going. They kind of did show that in the original seasons, but like I feel like you could have added in a less Jedi and like overarching like important story where Ahsoka still could have went through these trials and tribulations and really been away and had her own.
But Cory, let me just, like, what you just said is entirely at odds with each other, because you started with, all right, let's have Ahsoka do something that's like away from the Jedi and not, and then you're like, let's have her do something with Ventress, who's, I mean, not actually.
Remember what happened to Ventress when she like and Ahsoka were teaming up, like right before she got exiled from the Jedi Order? Like that itself was kind of almost like this, where it was kind of like self-contained, like underbelly of Coruscant storytelling, and it had nothing to do with like the Clone Wars, but it was still character development. I mean, and it used Ventress.
So you're saying, okay, replace the Martez sisters with Ventress,
or keep the Martez sisters in all 4 episodes, but maybe switch up what the story is and have it interact with other established Clone Wars characters.
I mean, that's fine. I'm not sitting here and saying this is one of the best arcs of all time and like how dare we criticize it. I think that this arc has problems. I think that it is slow. I think it does have issues. And if you want to say, okay, take this arc and do it a little bit better, okay. That's a perfectly valid thing to say. But that's not arguing, but that's a very different argument than this arc was filler or this arc shouldn't have existed. There's a big difference between saying, take the ideas of this arc, make it a little bit more interesting. Maybe you need, maybe a little less focus on these Martez sisters who are, I admit, kind of annoying and kind of difficult to deal with. And maybe, all right, instead of spice running with the Pikes, maybe it's, you can changing the story a little bit. That, again, perfectly valid. And I agree. Though I would not give this episode a 10. I wouldn't give this episode a 7. But I certainly wouldn't give this episode a 3.
No.
These episodes a 3. And I think that there's for a little bit, these were like the lowest rated episodes in the entire series. And that's ridiculous. Like, that's absurd. And
no. That's stupid.
What I'm saying is, one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast now is because I have a very different opinion on this arc. And you and I had this conversation. We literally were saying, you were like, oh my God, there's so few episodes left. It's going to be so rushed. I said, you know what? I trust them. I think those episodes are going to be great. And those episodes were great. I have no problem with, I didn't need 5 episodes of the final arc. I'm not saying it would have made it worse. I'm just saying I didn't need it. It was everything that needed to happen happened. We got everything we needed to see. And I'm not going to sit here and complain and go, oh my God, I wish there was less of Clone Wars. I wish we had a little less time in that prison because whatever. Again, if you fundamentally, if you're arguing there was too much, you have to be saying it because I would have wanted X. And I just haven't heard anyone say what they would have wanted. I've just heard a very nebulous.
I agree. No, the hatred is insane, and they take it out on the Martez sisters. The Martez sisters weren't the problem here. It was the story they were telling, which I think was more of the problem.
I even think that the Martez sisters, especially the older one, especially Rafa, she comes off really bad in these episodes. But I think that very long initial thoughts discussion. Let's talk about the entire episode, and we can kind of come back to how we're rating this.
One more quick question to you. Could you have also taken the Bad Batch arc out completely and only tell Clone Wars with the final 4 episodes? Because if anything, like the Bad Batch was I guess theoretically filler itself.
I don't love the term filler. I think that the term filler is pretty unfairly used in some of these cases because fundamentally in a story like Clone Wars, the Bad Batch arc isn't actually filler because it was a battle within the Clone Wars. Technically that happened and you can't things did happen.
Right. Now, that's fair.
Yes, in the grand scheme of things, does the show change fundamentally if that doesn't happen? No, but the Clone Wars as a story is about choosing which things from the war to show. So I don't love filler in a not an episodic show, but a slightly more episodic show like Clone Wars.
Right, that's fair.
But look, are the Bad Batch and the Martez sisters arcs on the same level as the finale? No, of course not. I'm not arguing that. I'm not even coming close to that. I'm just saying these were perfectly fine episodes. And as you said, if this wasn't season 7, no one would have a problem with it. No one would have batted an eye. And I don't think it's fair to hold these episodes to some kind of these are the final episodes and they need to be amazing when the final 4 were pretty universally accepted to be amazing. And that's really my entire argument. That don't put the blame of you were sitting through these episodes waiting for that finale. That doesn't mean these episodes were bad. It just means that we knew the finale was coming and we got built up to it.
Well, the hatred for these episodes was ridiculous. I saw fan reactions and people were very angry about it. I couldn't believe it.
I really genuinely wonder. Because again, having watched these episodes a second time after seeing the entire show, I wonder if that would have happened if this was released as a block and not as week to week. I really think that the hatred for these episodes came down to people knew that we were getting the Siege of Mandalore at the end, and they were antsy for it, and they were worried, what if this is taking up valuable time?
Well, nobody knew. Listen, I will tell you what I thought. I knew Siege of Mandalore would be new content, but I'd be lying to you if I didn't think that they would retell parts of Revenge of the Sith just under the scope of characters that you didn't see before.
They literally did.
I know, but in other aspects of it too.
I mean, but I don't know about other aspects. They basically tell the entire plot of Revenge of the Sith. The first episode is Obi-Wan and Anakin running off to save the Chancellor. Obi-Wan is in the next thing going, Dooku is dead, I'm going to Utapau. We literally see multiple conversations from Revenge of the Sith in those episodes.
Well, I think you'll make fun of me, and this is, I guess, what I wanted, and you probably would argue that it shouldn't be there, but I wouldn't lie to you. With how attached I am to the Clone Wars versions of these characters, I would have loved to see the recreation of real scenes in a movie, like Anakin and Obi-Wan's fight, and some other ones too, just because of just how much I love the way they tell the characters with the same voice actors. And like some of like I don't.
Corey, we're gonna table this discussion for next time because we don't need to talk about that. But the one thing I'm gonna say is, for someone who really loves Revenge of the Sith, you seem really like excited about just invalidating it and like retelling that story.
Well, they kind of did. You just said it yourself. They line for line redid this.
But they didn't redo anything. Well, they did. They redid one conversation. But that aside, let's get back on track and talk about these 4 episodes. I'm just going to go through and sort of give a quick kind of recap on what happens in each of the episodes. Episode 1, Gone Without a Trace. This is kind of your just setup episode. Ahsoka on her motorcycle crashes in, meets Trace. They meet Rafa. They begin to repair the droids. The droid goes on a rampage. Honestly, thoughts on episode 1? I think episode 1 is actually like completely fine. I don't have it like.
No, I had no issues with episode 1.
Episode 1 is just kind of okay. What is Ahsoka doing? She's off, doing these things. I like getting to see the underside of Coruscant. I like that, in the one of the first images we have of Star Wars is, you'll never see a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. And then kind of from that point forward, Star Wars is pretty has a lot of either idyllic or war stuff. Kind of getting to see Coruscant has some an underside. It makes sense that industrialized as a city would have some real problems. As I said, the beginning of this of Ahsoka meeting Trace and kind of figuring out her way. This feels very in line with the Ahsoka novel. I'm not going to spoil that entire thing because that's if you haven't seen it, you haven't read it, you should, and even Cory hasn't. But it's very much in line with that kind of. I understand the choices Ahsoka makes after Order 66 in line with this kind of thing of kind of meeting people, helping them, stuff like that. One thing I want to talk about, and we'll talk about this throughout the entire episode, but right at the beginning, you have the line, Jedi running around starting wars, and Trace saying, growing up we heard stories, I guess they weren't what they thought they were. And what's interesting, because we've been talking about the hate that these episodes get, and I'm wondering a little bit, this is The Last Jedi. This is almost line for line what Luke is saying in The Last Jedi, which is like...
But the issue, and the thing with Last Jedi is it's Luke saying it versus a random person in the belly of Coruscant saying it. But
let me pull back a little bit, because I'm not even just talking about the characters themselves. One of the things that people have gotten really mad about, and for the record, I don't mind this, I think it's actually perfectly in line with Luke, is the way they say that The Last Jedi is sort of attacking fans for liking Star Wars. It's sort of again, I think this is a bad faith argument, but to just kind of take them at their word. It's the sort of idea that Rian Johnson is saying, you thought the Jedi were cool. The Jedi are actually awful. And in many ways, this line right here of growing up, we heard the stories. This is kind of that exact same type of thing. A line of dialogue that is looking a Star Wars fan in the eye and saying, you've heard the stories about how great the Jedi were. The original trilogy is just the story, the idea, these idyllic, incredible heroes of old and how great they must be. And then we see in the original trilogy, as much as they have their problems, the Jedi are incredibly impressive. I mean, Anakin, comparing Anakin, young Anakin in Phantom Menace, who is a slave, who is as low on the economic totem pole as you can be, who has this no one can kill a Jedi line, very idealized, they're amazing. And yet here you have people in a, not slavery, but in a similar low economic position, and they have a completely opposite view. And I do wonder if there are some people who really do, who did have a problem with The Last Jedi for that sense, and aren't just being the sort of bad faith actors that a lot of them are, if there is something similar going on here with some of the hate that they're getting from this. Because I think these episodes are pretty strong. There's a lot of indictment of Jedi in all of this.
It's interesting to me because, again, I can't group people together because everyone has different opinions and people didn't consume all Star Wars media. But if you want to look at a really good deconstruction of Star Wars, the Jedi, the Sith, there's like the Knights of the Old Republic 2 game, which people say is like the best deconstruction of Star Wars ever. And like I think a lot of those same
Play
people
the
love.
KOTOR games. That is all we are going to say.
I know. And like in KOTOR 2, it's very similar. And in fact, it's the exact same messaging. So I feel like there is a distrust of Disney from people because like Disney doesn't canonize anything. Like the people, they think like George Lucas is the only person that can write Star Wars, and anything Disney does is just like not like good. So there's bad faith just from the fact that Disney shouldn't be able to tell these stories. But that being,
can I just make a quick like public service announcement to the anti-Disney people? I do not like The Last Jedi, and I think Rise of Skywalker is garbage. I did not like Solo, and I didn't particularly like Rogue One. That being said, Clone Wars Season 7, Star Wars Rebels, The Mandalorian, Force Awakens, Disney is not batting zero. Disney is doing some good stuff.
This is Dave Filoni, who was writing Star Wars content under Lucas.
I fully understand that, but just for all of the... And look, I would be perfectly content if they were just let Dave Filoni run and do whatever they want. That being said, for all of the Dave Filoni needs to replace Kathleen Kennedy stuff, Dave Filoni's been doing pretty well under Kathleen Kennedy. I don't think it's Kathleen Kennedy's the problem. I think it's the people that they've hired to make some of these movies. Just
I also, yeah, well, the issue...
The hate. Because Disney gets a lot of hate, and it's weird that, like, for everyone loving both The Mandalorian and this, there's sort of this, like, well, that's not actually Disney. And it's like, Disney made this stuff. This was out on Disney Plus. If we're going to hammer Disney when they make a bad movie, we have to give them credit when they do something good. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I'm in the splat dab in the middle of two fandoms that like hate new content. So like Star Trek's kind of in the same boat. The thing with Star Wars is the issue with Star Wars, especially with the sequel trilogy, is they are trying too hard to recreate the magic of what made the original trilogy good to the point of fault where they just like all they want to do is fan service and recreate moments of what was already done better in the original trilogy and maybe other Star Wars movies, while like Star Trek has completely gone off the rail and like doesn't feel like Star Trek. It just feels like an action adventure sci-fi movie. But like I think both are equally valid in terms of problems. With this arc in particular, the non-bad faith actors I think were just upset because they felt like too much time was wasted and they wanted more what I wanted, where they wanted more expansion of the lore within the Clone Wars. If the non-bad faith actors.
I get it. I'm wondering a little bit. Just because especially watching it a second time and just being like, that is like straight out of The Last Jedi. Like that is very much like character kind of looking at the camera and being like, no, the Jedi kind of stink. Like they're kind of bad.
That's the issue at all.
Not even just, let me rephrase it. Not that the Jedi are bad, but when you're a child, the Jedi are these amazing warriors, and it turns out they're not that good.
Well, in fact, that was actually the most interesting part, and that was like, again, I told you, there's like two parts of the arc that existed. It's just for the sisters to tell Ahsoka that Jedi are not everything they were supposed to be, and I think, like, I'm blanking on what my other point was, but like that was one of the more interesting parts because that also their backstory ties into like a previous Clone Wars episode. I forgot, somebody listed the episode, but I think it was the first time you see Cad Bane.
Yeah, it's that. Like, yeah. We saw the thing that happened,
which is in fact, I give that a big thumbs up. Actually, I think that's the best part of the episode.
Mm-hmm. All right, episode 2, Deal or No Deal. The Martez or Rafa finds a job and they take out the Silver Angel on their maiden flight. On the exit, they pass through a military tower, accidentally using a military lane. Anakin senses Ahsoka.
Oh, love that. I actually like that part too.
I got a real smile. Always looking out for his Padawan.
Hold on. Here's the question.
Yeah.
Anakin knows that was Ahsoka, or was it just a feeling?
Anakin knows it was Ahsoka.
Really? You think so?
Yeah.
Because he was like so scared for her in like the final 4 episodes. Like, oh my god, where have you been? How are you? Like that type of stuff.
Yes, because she left and then was not on the planet anymore.
All right, fine.
Maybe I say no. I mean, maybe.
But I'm thinking of more of like Empire Strikes Back, where like was it Empire or Return of the Jedi? It was like one of them where like Luke was flying by and Vader like had a feeling, but
Return of the Jedi.
It was Return of the Okay.
Um,
So you don't think it's more like Return of the Jedi?
Yeah, a little column A, a little column B. I think that it's kind of. I think he noticed it was Ahsoka and was just like, let her pass. I think he probably assumed that she ended up in that lane because she was so used to flying out of it because, it was, she's used to being in military hardware.
Mm-hmm.
That
was my second favorite part of the episode.
So then we end up on Kessel. Interesting because I've been joking, and we'll talk about this a lot next week about sort of things that Filoni did that kind of are retreading and often doing better something from other movies. And I was like, I wonder what he's going to do about Solo. But I realized we've only been to Kessel in that one Clone Wars episode or that one Rebels episode and in Solo, right?
Yes.
So
actually, it wasn't Solo where Kessel debuted as like a Vista, or was it Rebels?
It was Rebel. It was in Rebels first. But it's animated, so some people don't necessarily count it. So I have a Star Wars question for you. You're kind of a Star Wars lore guy. You like a lot of stuff, right?
I consume a lot of Star Wars material, yes.
Why in the world are there slaves on Kessel and not droids?
Why? Because Kessel is run by gangsters.
Yeah, but why is it cheaper to have humans doing the labor and not droids?
Well, assuming you only have to feed slaves versus droids that have like a very high take cost, and then they malfunction, and you have to do memory wipes, and then you see even as Solo they have to giant fucking droid rebellion where they start murdering everyone. So
no, that is not a valid argument. There is a 15 million strong army of droids in the galaxy. It's not. You can have.
But like that argument breaks Star Wars because who were slaves also is the Wookiees in order to get the Kyber crystal.
No.
So
I understand. In some places, I understand it because there's certain value. For example, Anakin as a slave actually makes sense because Anakin is in some level skilled. Like Anakin's actually like building things and doing sort of ingenuity and stuff, and I can kind of understand. All right, I'm going to be very careful. Slavery is obviously awful. We're not defending slavery in any way. I can understand economically why you're looking at this world and you're saying I have a choice between buying a human for a slavery and buying a droid, and you're evil enough that you're willing to make that choice. I kind of at least understand economically the Anakin one. I just don't understand in literally like a factory like this, what benefits does a human have than a droid? Humans take way more energy in terms of calories than like power for a droid.
I think also slavery is also meant, again, like this has always been a thing in prequels, is that like it shows how broken the Republic kind of is, how they like their government show like a blind eye to this. So I think it's more so just like it's more of a plot telling device. If like,
I agree. I think this is entirely
because there's no real lore reason why Kessel has slaves.
That's why I'm
versus...
just asking you. Like, is there actually any lore reason as to like this because I just think it kind of just doesn't make sense. Like in a world where it would, I mean, unless, all right, here's the one argument: the price of droids has gone substantially up because the Confederacy is buying all of the droids, forcing the price of labor down, and therefore you are incentivized to buy humans instead of droids because all droid factories are making droids for the army.
I like where your mind is at, but there's no actual canon reason as to what you're saying.
That's
I do like where your mind is at.
That's fine, but I'm trying to compensate. They pick up the spider.
I have a question for you though too, and this is actually more of a macro Star Wars question. Do you like how every single word and some people like it and some people hate it. How every word ever uttered in the original trilogy became like a massive thing, like the Kessel Run,
No.
like Corellian, like starfighters,
No.
like every word, every single word that was ever
rephrase
said.
it. Yes and no. I do like when you build a holistic world, and I do think that it's important when you are building a world for that world to feel real and lived in. And yes, it actually does make sense that certain, like, fundamentally you would have these sort of monikers in the world of in the galaxy of Star Wars that have meaning. And, like, we say things because they have meaning and they're not meaningless. That said, I do agree with you that there are some problems with how much sometimes we do go too far. For instance, I've come around on Mandalore. I'm back in on Mandalore. That said, it is a little bit ridiculous that they just took one guy's armor from the original trilogy, who's not that cool a guy, and basically built an entire world out of it.
But that's also, I you know what, as a sci-fi fan, and I consume a lot of sci-fi, I actually love this about Star Wars. Because you're right, like Boba Fett meant nothing in the original trilogy, but then they took something and made a lot out of it. Like I was like on board with you. I thought the idea not only was like the Mandalorians like a weird concept to me, but like if you think about the clones, how like all of the clones were based off the same genetic makeup of Boba Fett's father, and like it makes the world feel kind of.
Boba Fett's father. Remember, Boba Fett is a clone.
Well, Jango Fett. So then of Jango Fett.
But remember, Boba is a clone of Jango. Yeah. So technically, it's not even. Technically, they are all genetically the same as Boba.
But like, also that leads into why the Clone Wars exist. The throwaway line of he fought in the Clone Wars, or you fought in the Clone Wars. Like that is exactly the same exact principle.
I agree with you, or I don't think it is necessarily bad. That said, I do think it can lead to some problems, and occasionally it does pigeonhole you sometimes in ways that are probably a little problematic. That said, or let me phrase it this way. It is sometimes a problem, and I do think Star Wars really has a problem, and really J.J. Abrams has a problem, and I guess you could say that about some things in Star Trek too. If you don't plan these things out and think them through, they can lead you down really dangerous paths. For instance, the whole Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs, I don't have a problem with the fact that doesn't actually make any sense. Like, I don't have a problem that, like, clearly it's just a bunch of babble and it doesn't actually make sense in terms of, like, what a parsec actually is. And I don't love it when the story decides, let's actually make it so that does make sense. I don't love that. And in general, I think that don't try to cover up the fact that a story is written with in-canon explanations. Sometimes something is just written and it's kind of silly. And I never had a problem with the whole Kessel Run thing. I never had a problem with, like, the Death Star plans. Like, that never bothered me. And I don't entirely love that Disney likes to go back and, like, no, that wasn't a mistake. That wasn't a plot hole. Actually, it made total sense. Sometimes just let your story be.
It's just interesting because as a sci-fi consumer, I think that makes the world, as you said, like, then you just don't have, like, random lines that makes things feel important. Like, for example, like, I actually love the subtle nods in, like, Rebels and Clone Wars to these, like, non-canon, like, Knights of the Old Republic. Mandalore never existed except for Knights of the Old Republic, so I like that type of thing. It's just, like, it really, you're right. I feel like the whole Kessel Run thing was kind of ridiculous. And then they're also, like, going back and trying to fix things that people complained about, like if Rise of Skywalker, Chewie getting the medal, and like the Han shot first thing, and all that stuff. Like that's type of stuff where I get it.
This is not just a Star Wars thing. This is what Disney is doing right now. Like Disney, when they are remaking or doing stuff, they are all in on this. We are going to fix the problems and the plot holes, and they should stop doing that. people liked your stories. They liked them despite those things. We don't need to be told actually they were fine this whole time. Because A, half the time they were fine this whole time and your explanations actually make less sense. Or B, if they were that much of a problem, we wouldn't have liked your thing in the first place.
I think that's the issue of the age we live in with the internet and Twitter, and I think Rise of Skywalker was an entire apology for, obviously you know this, but like because of Twitter and like social media, and I think social media and the internet like kind of ruins movie making in a way, because like creators are just like so like, especially Disney, and this is a Disney problem, they're like these like market like focused, like we have to make this appealing to as many people as possible type product, and I think that's a huge problem, and it hinders art.
Yeah, I stop responding to bad faith criticism in your movies, people, or TV shows. We went off on a real tangent on this one. We completely lost.
But it kind of falls into the sister arc, because like me, who's not a big fan of this arc, I don't even think it's in the ballpark of anything bad. If, as I told you, at its worst, the worst words I could give it is average. And average in Clone Wars is not a bad thing, because average in Clone Wars is usually above average on everything else. It's just I felt it was too long, and in the final season they didn't give me enough of what I really was like craving. Like if like I go into like the last season of Clone Wars like craving something, and I get something more like this, which felt more standalone-ish, that's where my problems came from. But this backlash also with fans, where like if it's not what you wanted it or hoped it to be, it's the worst thing ever made, I think is another big problem.
Yeah, it's just I think this is more. I mean, we ended up on this just kind of talking about the Kessel thing, so I don't think it's that like big a deal. But it's just, you know, in general, I don't love this responding to Twitter, and especially responding to bad faith criticism specifically within your movie. And I didn't like The Last Jedi, but I did not need you to make a movie where you were like, ha ha ha, we all saw how much you hated The Last Jedi, right? Like, don't do that. Make your movie.
And you and I kind of touched upon this before we started recording. The Martez sisters. Like, obviously they're supposed to be Hispanic. Like, do you think they did this as a way of adding diversity? Because, like, do you think if they were named a Star Warsy name, like, and that's a very hard thing to say, like, what is a Star Warsy name?
I mean, Rafa and Trace are fine.
Yeah, but exactly. But fine, they just had no last names. They were brown-skinned, they, like, were kind of Hispanic acting, blah, 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 but they had no Martez in their last name. Do you think that, like, defeats the purpose of why Disney put these types of two characters in, like, in terms of, like...
I don't agree that that's what was going on here. I think they just designed characters, and this is what they happen to be. I don't buy this they're trying to add diversity thing, like, or
I'm not saying I don't mean it in a
or that they're doing it as like we have to fill these quotas. I think they just design characters. The fact that they happen to be, you know, again, I say Latino, but that's sort of a very complicated thing here. I don't think it just doesn't really matter to me. I don't really, like, fundamentally, we're not on Earth, therefore we can't really talk about diversity in the same way. So I kind of don't care that much.
I think
Fundamentally, like, it is a good thing that we had some diverse voice actors. That's really cool. I love that. Having some characters who theoretically look like some people, if we have some little girls who get to have someone who looks like them, I think that's great. I don't have a problem with it. I would agree that the fact that they're named Martez is a little weird, in that why it does feel a little off in terms of Star Wars. Like, it does feel a little like I'm not entirely sure why they have this name when, like, they're not actually from a Latin American country, since they're not from Earth. But, like, I don't know. I don't think it really matters.
It's funny because it actually is a very interesting thing about inclusion, because Star Wars, the original trilogy, was like overwhelmingly not only white but male. and like except for like Lando and Leia, obviously, but like it was an overwhelmingly white male cast, and
That
like
was a
almost
bad.
no
That was a
diversity.
problem.
Yeah, no, I'm saying that. Yeah, and it's and then with the prequels, there's more diversity, but you're still not like there
I
yet.
mean, when
Like
you
you
say
have
more
Mace Wit.
diversity, it's basically Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah, you got Padme, Samuel L. Jackson.
Padme. Oh, isn't a woman? Well, okay, you have Padme.
Well, I know, but
You've
like
now named exactly as many women and exactly as many people of color as you did in the original trilogy, and you said it was better.
no, but I'm not. Well, no, there was more than that. Let me think. In the
There
original,
kind of wasn't.
actually, now that you mention it,
No. Both the prequels and the original trilogy have a very serious problem. And I would even say the original trilogy is slightly better because at least Leia is a legitimate main character and Padme is kind of a problem.
yeah.
Hey,
But
the
okay,
first
so
time
but
they
that
actually began to get this right was the Clone Wars with
but
Ahsoka.
another issue with Star Wars is like unlike Star Trek where like you like Earth is still Earth, and you have all the other languages that like Jean-Luc Picard is a Frenchman, obviously, and like you could still have Spanish speakers and this and that. English, they called English in Star Wars basic, so basic is a language which means English. So you can't have the Martez sisters like speaking Spanish or giving like Spanish like things, and like that actually kind of hurts diversity a lot because you can't have cultural things.
No, but this is where I disagree though. I don't think like fundamentally when you're telling a story that's like this type of fantasy, there doesn't need to be real world cultural diversity. Like that doesn't like it's not a problem that in Game of Thrones no one speaks Spanish because there is no Spanish. It's a literally different Earth. Fundamentally, there's no canonical reason that characters should be white. There have been, albeit not enough, but albeit there has been characters of color from, these early on in Star Wars. So there's no like, it's not like these people came from Earth and they're all Americans and they're all like, no. Characters can be whatever race they want. It doesn't have a problem. I don't know if the name Martez is particularly Star Wars-y. That said, does it really matter? No. And if we're going to get some more diversity, that's a good thing. So I'm not going to complain or criticize the fact that, like, Martez doesn't sound like a Star Wars-y last name. And even that is kind of a little like, well, why can't it be a Star Wars last name? Why is, what about it is not Star Wars-y other than it's not white, and Star Wars has, for the most part, been pretty white. But why is Martez any better than Skywalker?
Sure. No, I mean, I agree. It was very interesting to me because I don't know. I think Kathleen Kennedy has been on record with this, like being like that she wants to like, and she said these words like she wants to like really put women as the forefront of the new Star Wars, like really put in diversity. And I think I hate to say it, Mark, I think there is like a diversity quota that Star Wars is trying to hit. And I'm not saying this is in a negative term. In fact, I'm saying it more as a positive term. Look at like Rise of Skywalker, and like every frame you have all races of people on both sides. Like in the First Order, you see like Asian women being officers and black this and that. And I think it's actually a very good thing they're doing this. It's just I think you can't ignore that it is something that is being done. Like you have to say, well,
I am not saying it's not being done, and I think that there's a much broader conversation about like The Last Jedi and the movies. I just don't think that they're going as hard on the shows. One, The Mandalorian is kind of not on that level. And two, I think that they let Dave Filoni do what he wanted in these episodes. And even though these are not the ones he worked on the most, these were directed by somebody else, I just don't think that this is like, they were like, you have to include, essentially Latino characters. I just don't buy that. And at its core, like, you know what? We had a problem at first. Star Wars was very white and very male. Sometimes you need the Rooney Rule in football. Sometimes you need to just say, screw it. We're adding more characters of color and we're adding more women. And if you don't like it, don't watch. And I don't have a problem with that.
I have no problem at all either, but there's like two sides of it. One, people that like call it out and say that's all they're trying to do, and like that type of like forced diversity is ruining Star Wars and fiction. And then there's the other side that is like denies it, like no, it's not happening. You just don't like it when women are. I think it's happening, and I think it happening is a good thing. I think though there has to be tasteful.
I just don't think this is a particularly big example of this.
Well, I agree with you. If these girls, well, again, like we started the topic with if these girls were the exact same thing, but you took Martez out of their last name, would it mean the same thing? And I think the answer is yes, but I think they added Martez consciously.
I think that the argument you could make is they design these characters and we're like, let's make a last name, and because they are coded as Latino, even though there are no Latinos in this universe, they chose a Latino last name because of coding. Can you argue that that's sort of maybe not the best thing in the world? Yeah, but in this case, I don't think it's that big a deal.
And it's also like, where do you draw the, like, if there was like, would you feel like the last name like Schwartz would be out of place in Star Wars? I think yes.
I mean, if it was the banking clan.
Yeah, well, I mean that's the funny thing about. In fact, Star Wars is not only bad with diversity, like they're also really bad at like racial like stereotypes.
Yeah, there's a lot of very bad racial coding in Star Wars.
Which is why like I'm like more okay with this because
like
there's
kind of a lot of bad racial coding in everything because we're not very good at this stuff.
I know, and like I think George Lucas like isn't intentionally making like anti-Semitic tropes and racist tropes like because he's a racist.
Allegory and coding. I don't think it's an allegory. I don't think he's trying to do it consciously, but I think that when you're not really paying a lot of attention, these things can happen.
Yeah.
All right. So finishing up on Deal or No Deal. Trey, they pick up the spice. They end up in the air. Ahsoka and Rafa get into this big argument about how bad it is to deliver this stuff to the Pikes, and Trace decides to dump the spice, thinking that will solve their problems, being incredibly stupid. Ahsoka then comes up with this kind of ridiculously dumb plan to try and defraud the Pikes. Now, here's a question for you. If you read my notes, you've already seen this. Do you think that this plan is bad on purpose, and that the reason for it is because it's showing how much Ahsoka, having learned from Anakin, who is kind of the king of terrible plan, we'll make it up as we go along, it's all going to go wrong anyway, and I'll just figure it out. And that's kind of what she defaults into. Do you think that that's the point?
That she's going for like a like off the seams plan because luck will have her side because that's like what she's learned from Anakin.
Yeah, that she is that is how Anakin works. That is how Anakin operates. She is Anakin's student, and
yes,
I think that is straight up the point.
And I think not only that, I think it also come up in the episode about like where you like you're my older brother. I think in fact, yeah.
And I think that even more than that, I think the juxtaposed with the Bad Batch, which also has Rex doing some kind of pretty dumb, not dumb, but like some potentially not great ideas strategically. I think that in many ways that the two of them is like, if this is Anakin's two students, Rex and Ahsoka, they have learned from Anakin that don't always plan these things out. Your plans are going to fail, but you can carry the day with your skills anyway.
No, yeah, exactly. I think that's 100% exactly what they were going for, too. Mm-hmm. I think Ahsoka is very much, in a lot of ways, a mirror of Anakin.
Mm-hmm. All right. Episode 3, Dangerous Debt. And this episode is pretty much, we are on the Pike planet. They are captured, and we get our first, we get the full story of what happened to Rafa and Trace's parents, which is a coming off of a Clone Wars episode from season 1. So, and this is
just by the way, like this trope of Ahsoka, and I think you've complained about this in the past, and I certainly do. The trope of like hiding something, and it's like because the real reason I could see Ahsoka hiding the fact that she's I guess a former Jedi from them is because like she doesn't want to lose them as friends. But I think Ahsoka's above that, and I think Ahsoka's actually the type of person that would be straight up with the sisters, saying like, "This is what happened to me," and I hate this trope of like hiding information to cause a miscommunication, for them to get mad, for them to only make up after like it's communicated properly. I don't like that trope at all, and I don't think Ahsoka is someone that would fall into it, especially.
I don't love that trope either. I think it's okay here. I think it's okay here for a couple of reasons. One, Ahsoka isn't a Jedi anymore and doesn't really have a great concept as to what that means yet. And I think that in many ways the reason she doesn't tell them has actually less to do with like them as friends, and has more to do with the fact that she does not really know who she is as not being a Jedi. And I think that that's like right off the bat a big part of it. Two, there really is no animosity that is caused from her not telling them this. Like, they find out in that last episode that she's a Jedi, and then nothing happens. It's not like there's this big miscommunication.
But that's the issue, and it's not only is it a main centerpiece of the storytelling they're doing, but Ahsoka like kind of like risked lives by not using her Force powers to their full extent. Like, so I think it actually hurts the story in a way, But I think the reason that she's not using them is not to conceal her identity. I think it's because she's kind of not sure if she's allowed to. Remember, the Jedi are not just like you're not like just a pilot. Like, this is almost a religion. Like, she literally walked away from the entire concept of all this. And I think that part of the point of this arc is her being able to recognize that just because she's not a Jedi anymore doesn't mean she can't help people, and doesn't mean she can't use the skills that she inherited as a Jedi in her life. And I think, but I don't think Ahsoka ever fell in trope with the Jedi religion. I compare Ahsoka to Anakin, and I don't think Anakin just consciously thinks about like the moral ambiguity of using Force powers to help people if it's not to serve the Jedi code. I think Ahsoka would just do it because it's what she thinks is right.
Well, by the end, yes. But at this moment, her entire world has been shaken. And she has no concept of... Again, she's been a Jedi since she can remember. I mean, I guess she kind of remembers briefly the possibility of becoming a slave and being saved by Plo Koon. But, like, her entire life has been a Jedi. And even Anakin at least has some concept of what it's like to be something other than a Jedi. He remembers...
But Ahsoka, when she got rescued by Plo Koon, was like 12. She wasn't that young. How I haven't seen... I'm not going to lie to you. I don't remember the first Star Wars. How old was she?
There is no episode. It's not... We've never actually
seen
it.
Movie.
It's not in the episode. I thought... No.
It wasn't on screen?
No, we've never seen it. The first thing we see of on screen is her walking out as a Padawan to Anakin, and...
Oh, she was already a Padawan. Yeah, so she was actually like a youngling?
She was a full-on youngling. She was not... Wasn't like they found her in episode or in the movie. No.
I understand. All
so
right.
She has no concept of what it's like to be anything other than a Jedi. And now she's out in the world and trying to make her way. And I think that for her, she's trying to turn her back on the Order. She's trying to walk away from that life. And I think that it's not at all unreasonable for her to be like, maybe I wouldn't use the Force. Maybe I shouldn't. And maybe it's not, I'm not allowed to, but maybe it's, I chose not to be a Jedi. I want to turn my back on that stuff. So I'm not going to use the Force because using the Force is reminding me of everything I left behind.
I viewed it in these contexts of these 4 episodes as more of a, like, if they find out I'm a Jedi, they won't want to be my friend anymore.
I think that's a tiny bit of it. I don't think it's all of it. I just think that
This wasn't nuanced. It wasn't nuanced in the way you're talking about. The way I viewed it, the way the storytelling was, especially how they like went on and opened up how the Jedi screwed them and how they don't like Jedi, and then she started acting differently around like after that story.
But you're acting as though, okay, this is the sort of the classic trope of like, we're gonna hide this information that's crucial to the thing, and then they're gonna find out the information and get all mad. That doesn't actually happen.
I know, which is why I thought it was like, again, that's like kind of a waste of time.
So you've gone from, I don't like that they did this trope, to they didn't do the trope, and I'm still like.
Well, I see what you're saying to me right now, and how you view it more so as like she has moral ambiguity about using her Jedi powers.
I don't think it's moral ambiguity. I think it is. I don't think she is. I think she is holding herself back because she is trying to figure out who she is as not a Jedi, and is deliberately trying to not be a Jedi. And part of being a Jedi, in this case, is using the Force.
And I think if they leaned into that and really made that a centerpiece of the 4 episodes, then these episodes would skyrocket, actually. But I think they really went for the flash over the substance, because a lot of it was actiony and like, oh, we were captured, put in jail, and just a classic like story, like an action story that's told in like Clone Wars. Just, I think they didn't lean into the theming more, and if they lean more into this type of theming that you're talking about, and this was more of a forefront, I would probably love these episodes, actually.
Read the Ahsoka novel.
I will.
All right. I want to talk specifically about the conversation between Ahsoka and Trace about what happened to their parents, and I think there's a couple of things I want to talk about here off the bat. One, I think that this is another example of getting character development for Anakin Skywalker in a scene that Anakin Skywalker is not in. Because fundamentally, Ahsoka, in this moment of hearing this story, and you just have this, her response of just, I'm so sorry. And I really want to give shout out to Ashley Eckstein for a really great line read there, because there's a lot of emotion in how she reads it. And it's really, again, like, I think fascinating seeing Anakin's student have a significantly better view and more like understanding of loss, of the idea that in a moment a child has lost their mother. They're not looking for you to tell them that everything happens for a reason, that the Force will guide you. They need support. And to add to that, they specifically call out that it's Jedi, essentially Jedi Master Luminara, who, one, is Barriss Offree's master, the one who frames Ahsoka for her to be in this entire situation. Just kind of a really fascinatingly weird, it was Luminara is kind of connected on both sides of it, which I think is just a weird, kind of a interesting tie-in to the whole thing together. But on top of that, Luminara has the moment where she has this conversation with Anakin when Ahsoka and Barriss are first trapped underground, where she says, I am prepared to let my Padawan go. And sort of saying, yes, I care about my Padawan, but I understand that sometimes you have to let things go and you have to accept that things happen because of the will of the Force. And yet you have here of Ahsoka very much echoing Anakin with like, no, these things are bad. We should try to stop them. We should do everything we can to stop them.
Do you think her response, because like her response of like, oh, everything happens for a reason, I like, sorry about that, and she just leaves them, I think that's actually, and I think like now that I'm actually more thinking about what people are complaining about, how like the deconstruction of Jedi could be like harmful, I think that's a little callous, and I think it's again done to service the story. But do you think like the Jedi would really have such a calloused emotional response to people that like lost everything in a fight? I think the Jedi would have done something to like make sure they got on their feet and not just like, oh, sorry, it's like, I guess, life will work out for you, bye. I think that is
I think fundamentally prequel Jedi, like Yoda and Windu suck. And that's
but I just can't imagine Yoda even Mace, absolutely. I think Mace is like a Jedi that is the reason everything wrong happens in Star Wars, if you think about it. But
we will take Mace apart in a week.
But like Yoda and like especially Obi-Wan and just like Plo Koon and like this other Jedi just would not. They would be like, "I'm so sorry this happened. Here, let me help you." They're not gonna like take them into the order, but be like,
I think that you have to like be a little bit careful with the fact that you're talking about someone who just lost their parent and in many ways hold the Jedi responsible for it. So I think you do have to be a little bit cautious that there's a pretty reasonable chance that there was more going on here than maybe Trace noticed in that moment. That being said, it is in line for someone like Luminara to attempt to provide comfort in the way that the Jedi know, which is to say, don't think of like, yes, this is bad, but there are reasons it happens, and they are now one with the Force. And I can understand that the Jedi have a difficult time being compassionate. And I don't think it's necessarily that they are callous and mean and just like, everything happens for a reason. Sorry your mom died, kid. I think it's that in their view of compassion is broken. And I think that that's the point about what the failure of the Jedi actually is. Like you talk
about purging emotion, which means if you purge emotion, you can't have compassion, is what you're saying?
Yes, and that at its core, the failure of the Jedi is the failure to treat Anakin Skywalker like a human being. And this is an example of that. And again, I don't read it as they were mean. I read it as they don't have a concept of what it's like to lose a parent. Because they don't have them.
Well, it's so interesting because you look at, like, do you know who should be, like, a Sith by now? Obi-Wan. Like, all the shit that happened. He watched, like, his master get cut down in front of him, and then everything that happened with the woman that he loved. And he is, like, avoided becoming he's, like, by far and away the best Jedi ever written. And he is someone that went through the system. Like, you know, like, he is, like, the standard bearer of being a Jedi.
No, that's not true, though. Who was Obi-Wan's master?
Qui-Gon, yeah,
but Qui-Gon Jinn is the Jedi who represents the opposite. Qui-Gon is someone who broke the rules. Is someone who...
Well, it's funny. I'm going to reverse this on you. I'll read the Ahsoka novel. Do you know there's a Qui-Gon novel, which is canon, by the way? You should read that. It goes into it goes into their relationship, especially when he's a young Padawan, and it does it very well. And as a Padawan, a very young Padawan, he was like the definition of a Boy Scout, and like he really butted heads with Qui-Gon and had to like learn to get along.
I'm sure that that's true. What I'm saying though is I think that part of the reason Obi-Wan is who he is because at his core he is a Boy Scout. He is I'm gonna follow the rules kind of guy. But I think the fact that Jedi was trained by someone who had a slightly different view has at least made him think through some of these things a bit more. And I think that plays into this quite a bit. That being said, I think that the point is that, yes, for Obi-Wan, this kind of almost cold emotionlessness kind of works. That being said, even then, we know that Obi-Wan is not perfect. We know that Obi-Wan had attachments.
Yeah, but that's what, like, I think Obi-Wan should be, like, the standard bearer of what Jedi should strive to be, because, like, he's, as you said, not perfect, but, like, you know, he has, like, a sarcastic quip here, he gets emotional, he yells, he loses his temper, like, he's, like...
He's probably sleeping with Ventress.
Okay, what?
Have you not watched the Clone Wars?
Ventress?
There are, like, so many Obi-Wan Ventress flirting moments. Come on.
It's fans like you that ruin Star Wars.
Oh, okay.
But
because literally there is a line in Clone Wars where Obi-Wan says Ventress, not a sight I wanted to wake up to, a literal call out of what if we were sleeping together?
All right. Cool. Anyway,
the fact that Ventress consistently calls Obi-Wan my dear.
They're not sleeping together.
I know they're not sleeping together, but they should be.
Anyway, You look at who the quintessential best Jedi is, Obi-Wan, and then like you're right, you look at what like everything wrong with the Jedi is Mace Windu. Like just seeing that reaction, like the only Jedi I could see having like such a cold callous. But here's a question to you: with the sisters, this is them telling the story to Ahsoka? Do you think they not embellish the story, but do you think this is how they remember the story?
Maybe
it wasn't as
already.
Oh, is that what you were saying? Okay.
I think you have to be careful with this is their perspective. And if I had to guess, Luminara wasn't being cold. She was trying to be compassionate in the way she knows how, which is let go, which is everything happens for a reason. It's the will of the Force. The Force will be with you. Your parents will still be with you. When these two children were looking for something completely different. I think that's the point we're trying to make here. This is not as simple as Jedi are bad. This is Jedi have such a rigid view on loss and how emotion, kind of burying your emotion, as well as no concept of what it's like to lose a loved one because they don't have loved ones, that they cannot be compassionate in a way that a child might need in that moment. And that is juxtaposed with Ahsoka, who does understand this because she's been taught by Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi who is destined to fall for this very reason.
Again, like that, the Anakin thing, that these 4 episodes had like bits and pieces that like I was like, yes, perfect, and like I think like the 4th, like we're about to get into the 4th. Was it the 4th episode where they end up like just back in prison again?
Yeah, together again.
Yeah, like this is like I just feel like it's almost like what people complain about like The Hobbit, where like they extend something just for the sake of they wanting to tell. I just like don't see why it had to be 4 episodes. And again, it's back to your original question when we first started this. If this was a 10 episode thing instead of 12 episodes,
this could have been 3 episodes. You could have combined Dangerous Dead in together again.
Sure. I just think 4 episodes was overkill, and if you were to go the 4 episode route with these 2 sisters, I don't mind the 2 sisters following Ahsoka throughout these 4 episodes. I just think you could have done clever ways to tie it into what has happened in Clone Wars since, which I think they dropped the ball on.
All right. Speaking of, our last conversation was sort of character development for Anakin when he's not in the episode. Let's talk about character development for Maul, even though he's barely in this episode. So, little context here. Cory and I were having a discussion a couple of weeks back about the best Star Wars characters. This was before Clone Wars Season 7, and we were discussing Darth Maul and where he ranks in kind of the pantheon of maybe the top 20, top 15 Star Wars characters. And one of the things about this, and Maul is barely in this episode, but I think this is actually one of the more, actually like really important Maul stuff. And the reason for that is seeing how much the Pikes, who are these, intergalactic known gangsters, are completely terrified of Darth Maul, does a really good job of selling just how impressive Maul actually is. Because remember, Maul has taken a lot of L's in Star Wars. Like, how many fights has Maul won in Star Wars before Season 7 of Clone Wars?
Okay, so he's back after Finn. It's funny you should say that. I don't remember Maul winning any fight. If anything, Savage Opress was doing all the winning. He wins
kind of one fight. He was able to sort of capture Obi-Wan in the Satine stuff. That's very,
yeah. But he's again like he's a dirty fighter. I think obviously.
No. What I'm saying though, my point by saying that is when you have a character who kind of takes a lot of L's. Another good example of this is General Grievous, who I think we do need a little bit more of this. And then you want everyone to be afraid of them. It's kind of hard to be afraid of a character when they're constantly losing. Having this thing where we see how genuinely terrified these criminals are of Maul, I think helps a lot in selling at least me, on like, oh no, Maul's really impressive. And he's built a really impressive criminal enterprise here.
Oh, absolutely.
And like, I really love that line where like the main, after the main guy's talking to Maul, and the kind of the underling is like, I hope Maul knows we don't jump at his command. And the main guy's like, would you be like the one to make that clear to him? And it's like, this Pike guy knows Maul is terrifying, and I like that. I think that that's really important. And at the end of the day, this final episode is kind of just about bringing Maul into all of this. And you know what? I think that the inclusion of the Pikes, I think, is more than just an excuse to bring in Maul. I actually think it does something for showing Maul just what Maul represents in this universe right now.
I think if Maul was like silent or like was like very soft spoken, almost like, again, obviously like it was in Phantom Menace, I don't think we'd be having this conversation. It's just his voice actor and the lines he's given are just brilliant and make him into like one of the most interesting and complex characters in all of Star Wars. And I think like if you want to credit his success, it's his voice actor. Like his voice actor, Sam, what's his last name? It starts with a W, I think.
Sam Witwer.
It is brilliant, and like I would say carries the Maul character. Like you could have a silent and soft-spoken criminal mastermind behind everything, Maul, that's just like recognizable because he's Darth Maul. But instead, they go like a complete opposite route where he does like soliloquies all the time and is like batshit crazy. And like I think they just do him such justice, especially through his voice acting and the lines that they give him. And if you think of another, I think arguably the best villain in all of Star Wars, in Thrawn. When does Thrawn win? Thrawn takes a loss all the time, but it's due to circumstances out of Thrawn's control, like his men disobeying orders or the plot convenience of the Force. There's just like
it is hard to write a villain in these contexts when you're writing a show where often the heroes win, and I think that they do a good job here of selling us on some Maul stuff. The rest of Together Again is pretty, it's eventful, but it's, Ahsoka goes through and is able to destroy the Pike's plant. They're able to escape the planet. We get kind of a very classic, about as classic as you can get Star Wars scene of the escape from a thing, putting Ahsoka on the gunship. Kind of, I don't think you can get more classic Star Wars than that. And then our lovely Mandalorians show up and begin, attempt to convince Ahsoka to go on. So the one thing I want to sort of end on here before we get to our final thoughts, unless you have anything to say about sort of the plot of this episode, but I don't think there's much to say. I'll take that as a no.
It ended the...
I've heard a lot of people... Yeah, I said I'll take that as a no. That's fine.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of people talking about sort of these episodes and saying that, well, the point of this was to show show Ahsoka that the people have lost faith in the Jedi and all that. And I think that is kind of not only half the story. I think the point of this is to push Ahsoka back to the Jedi. And I think if there is one shame about the overall arching sort of plot of Clone Wars, is it would have been nice if this type of thing had happened a while ago leading into season 7, and in sort of the kind of going against everything that you're saying of like, yeah, you wish that this was less episodes. On some level, it's kind of wish that there was even more of this stuff, because they do have to condense Ahsoka like completely falling out and totally leaving the Jedi, and then this arc is about sort of at first lowering how she feels and then bringing it back up at the end. I do think that there could have been more to that, and getting to see Ahsoka sort of rediscovering being a Jedi. There is, like, in a weird way, for as slow as these episodes are, and for as much as we're like, this probably could have been 3 episodes, in some ways, it kind of also would have been nice if we just got a bunch more of this stuff, and we could have had a little bit more of an arc for Ahsoka to kind of come back up. Because I really think that the point of this arc is not to shake Ahsoka's faith in the Jedi, but to restore Ahsoka's faith in the Jedi.
But, like, in the beginning of, I guess, jumping ahead to next arc, she's, like, not necessarily back to where she started. She, like, was very critical of Obi-Wan and Anakin's, like, decision-making when they didn't decide to jump and help Mandalore.
But she was specifically say, this is why the people have lost faith in the Jedi. I had to until I was reminded how important this stuff is.
Yeah.
Look, she didn't go back. I mean, we literally know, she says, they say, I did my duty as a citizen, not as a Jedi. It's not like she's ever going to completely go back. It's just that it is reminding of her of how important A, helping people is for her, and B, that the Jedi there is still a need for good people doing good things. And in order to do those good things, having Jedi powers is kind of important.
Right.
All right. I think with that, we can kind of wrap things up. We went a lot longer than I was expecting. I was expecting this to be a shorter one, but...
Well, we didn't really focus on what happened in these episodes. We more so focused...
We just kind of ranted about Star Wars. All right, so why don't we wrap things up? Final thoughts and ratings. We've kind of done a pretty holistic view of this whole episode, so we don't have to give that much talk on our final thoughts. But rating this arc as a whole, Cory?
I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I don't think I would raise my rating if this was a random throwaway season and these just happened to be 4 episodes in it. I think my rating would stay the same. I just felt more disappointed knowing there was a finite number of episodes left. And again, I wanted something out of this, which I got in the Siege of Mandalore, but I only got in the Siege of Mandalore in terms of I thought the Bad Batch arc was a very welcome return. And very calming to what Clone Wars used to be, the kind of episodic about the clones, what made Clone Wars great. I think Bad Batch touched upon. I think a lot of that was in this arc as well. But that being said, it just we both agree it could have been cut down an episode or two. I walked away feeling underwhelmed. I'm not going to let my emotions of what I expected in the entire season cloud my judgment about what this was in terms of against the television. I thought it was right down the middle. I thought it was average television. I would give it a 5 out of 10. Not saying it in a negative term. I'm just saying it was a very average arc. You know what? I will even increase it because there were 2 parts of the episode I loved. The deconstruction of the Jedi, which I loved in Last Jedi, and I still love in this. And I love the Anakin scene, and I obviously love the ending setup for Siege of Mandalore. So I will bump it from a 5 to a 5.5 out of 10.
All right. I think I'm not that far away from you as much as we argued about this. That said, I'm a little bit higher. I don't think that... I just don't have a problem with anything that particularly happened in these arcs. I think that is a little slow. I think that that's done purposefully. And I just think that at the end of the day, if the choice is, if you're setting up a wrong choice when you say we should have gotten something else. The choice is either this doesn't exist or this does exist. I'm glad this exists. Could this have been 3 episodes? Yeah, it probably would have been fine as 3 episodes. So it's certainly not anything spectacular. But I'm gonna give this a 6 out of 10. So I'm only 0.5 ahead of you. I just think that at the end of the day, a 6 out of 10 is still firmly in the good range. This is probably average for Clone Wars. Clone Wars is above average. That gives you, 6 out of 10, above average, good. Fundamentally, I think that these episodes are unfairly maligned. And again, I have a very different opinion now than I did when watching them initially, where, they were dragging. You know what? We got everything we needed in the final arc. With that being said, next week we'll be back to discuss the final arc of Clone Wars, which will be one of our more interesting ones, because I think we have a ton to say about all that. And what I think is strange, maybe the most universally accepted positive thing in Star Wars right now, which is kind of incredible that we're here. But thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you, Cory, for being here, and we'll be back with the next arc after this.